So how do we stop thoughts from arising in our heads? I recently read a book that talked about the methods that the Buddha has used to stop his thoughts. So the book says that, for example, the Buddha tried gritting his teeth, kind of like this, trying to stop the thoughts. And of course, that didn't work. He tried holding his breath. Or twisting his muscles to the point of pain. We also know that the Buddha has tried fasting and extreme forms of asceticism in order to achieve enlightenment and stop the thoughts in his head. Alas, that didn't work. And actually, the Buddha himself did not attain enlightenment until he has given up on these practices. So how do you stop thoughts? This is a really important question. Well, here's the key to stopping thoughts. First of all, understand that you cannot force thoughts to stop. With thinking, everything you do is a pedal. It gives it gas, gives it power. If you say, I'm going to stop thinking about an elephant, then you directly think of an elephant, right? Because the mind doesn't understand the language of no. There is no negatives in the mind. It's only an accumulation machine that tries to accumulate information and tries to collect as much information from the environment as possible to ensure its survival. So we cannot stop thought itself by forcing it. What we can do, and this is the only practice that is to meditate. And meditation here in this case doesn't mean closing your eyes and sitting in a corner. You can do that in the morning or in the evening before you go to sleep. This is really helpful. But the real key is that during your life, during the activities of the day, during your waking hours, and for enlightened people, they would also do this during their sleep, you would observe the thoughts. So the moment you start observing the thought, then there's a break in the identification process of the thought. So when I'm thinking the thought and I'm lost in the thought, there isn't me anymore, like as a consciousness that is separate from the thought. The thought has taken me over inside, and I'm identified with the thought. If I'm thinking a negative thought or even a positive thought, the thought has taken over me, and I've lost my consciousness. I've lost myself in the thought. So I'm not present anymore. However, when you are observing the thought, you are distinctly highlighting the distance between you and the thought. So you're looking at the thought. So this means that spiritually, you know that the thought isn't you. The same goes for a feeling, which is just accumulated thinking. So if you're observing a feeling, if you're feeling dreadful or if you're feeling sad, by observing the feeling, you're highlighting the distance between you and the feeling. By observing the thought, you're highlighting the distance between you and the thought. And what this does is that it deprives the thoughts and the feelings of the life energy that they sucked from you previously by pretending to be you. So you observe the thoughts, they're running in your head, and you keep observing. You know, oh, there's a lot of thinking in my head going on right now. I can feel my head flowing with ideas. I'm thinking 100 things at the same time. And with time, some of these thoughts, the ones that have not really been identified with you, they lose their ability to stay within you because they're not feeding off of you anymore. So they kind of like choose to leave you and go somewhere else where they can find a life energy. So some of these thoughts are going to go away, like the weaker ones. And the other thoughts that you have been identified with most of your life are going to also be weakened, but they're going to need a little bit more observation from you. So in essence, observing is the exact opposite of identification. So if you have an ego, this means you identify. You're identified with a thought and you believe it to be true, and you say, this thought is true. I will not let it go. This feeling, I feel overwhelmed, I feel this is unjust, etc. This is identification. And observing the thought, like, okay, I have a thought in me that keeps going on. I have a judgment in me. So observing. So observing is the act of building enlightenment in you. So basically, you can't really force the thought to go away. You can observe it, and once the thought realizes it cannot feed off of you, it will leave you. And once you've done that enough, and this is the case with the Buddha, he kept observing the thoughts after he gave up the practices of fasting and the other practices that we talked about. Then there's a distance, and then the distance becomes wider and wider. And just like we have said in the video about meditation is the practice of no mind. So when you're observing the thoughts, the state of no mind is deeply developed in you. So now you have more spaces of no mind, more space to be yourself. With time, the space is going to be large enough that life is going to lose all its suffering that is unnecessary. I'm not talking here about physical pain. I'm talking about unnecessary suffering. So observing the thoughts regularly, and if you can do it the whole day, that would be great. Like being there as the observer. Yes, what thoughts are there in my head now? And then you observe, And as we just also talked about in another video, the inner body is a great anchor for that. So you are anchored in the inner body and you're observing the thoughts. Eventually one day, you're going to wake up and then you're going to have a state where thoughts are almost not there anymore. And you are just an awareness looking around you. You're listening. You're seeing. You're feeling your weight on the chair. You're breathing. But there's no thought, no commentary. You're just the awareness that you are. And then you will realize that thoughts, which have a lifespan, they arise and then fall. And feelings arise and fall. And the body arises and falls. But actually you as a consciousness, you're constant, you're always there, you're always the observer, regardless of what happens in your life. You're always observing. And then there's a deep sense of peace, because you know that this observer cannot be destroyed. And you know that this observer has always been there and is going to always be there. So all the fear of death, all the fear of losing in life, it gets reduced to a certain stage that it no longer haunts you. And this is the state of enlightenment that many prophets have talked about. So for you and me, normal people, let this be our practice. During the day, we're going to practice meditation in the morning and in the evening, but during every other moment in our lives, we're going to be present, observing the thoughts, observing the feelings, looking around us, being in the moment. And then whenever a thought succeeds in taking over our attention and getting our identification with it, we're going to snap out of it. And then when we snap out of it, we're going to observe it again. Like, oh, there's a thought in my head. There's another thought. Oh, there's this feeling. And with time, this is going to be your true nature. And actually, the moment you're able to observe a thought, you broke the identification with it. And now it needs to do something else to get your identification. It's very cunning, the mind, but you have already won by observing. So let this be your practice. Observe your thoughts, observe your feelings. Peace.